submit the designs in the form of a relief sculpture. They submit designs in the form of a drawing. So someone at the Mint has to take that drawing and convert it into a 3D relief in clay. And then from the clay, they can make a plaster and then epoxy, and at some point they do a mechanical reduction lathe to make the hub or a die actual size for the coin.
Now, when you're actually doing your own, is this something that you can laser etch from your actual rendering?
Well, right, yeah. Well, see, here's the difference between what I do. When I do a coin design, I also will start with the drawing, but that's far from my final thing that I either have if I'm doing a work on commission, I do a drawing. I certainly don't show the customer the drawing. I show them the final rendering. But what I do is I start with the drawing sometimes, just an line drawing. I'll scan it in as digital image. And I'll bring that into my software and use that as a basis for starting my sculpting. And I'll go in and I can outline an area and say, okay, bulge this up by 3/1000ths of an inch, or mush this over here, or do some lettering and then emboss that to a certain height. I can do all those kind of operations in my software. And then I'll put this rendering. I can send a rendering to the customer, or if it's just something I'm making for myself, I can look at it and say, okay, yeah, I like the way that's going to look. Now, then the key difference between what I do and what the U.S. Mint does is I will cut a die directly by using a fairly sophisticated computerized or computer-controlled engraving machine. So what you end up with is the final coin is guaranteed to look exactly like my rendering that's reviewed, because both the rendering and the final coin are both generated by computer from the same source data. So there can be no deviation, by hand.
Right, exactly. You're cutting out that middleman.
Right. So that's the sort of the difference between my approach and the Mint's approach. But if I was in this artistic infusion program right now, I wouldn't be able to submit my renderings. I'd still have to do them by I could do a really super nice sculpted relief digitally, do a rendering of it, and they still wouldn't accept that. I'd have to do a line drawing and send it to them, and then they would sculpt it by hand. It sort of defeats the whole purpose. So I don't really even try to work with the Mint anymore. I'm doing my own custom minting projects and having a lot of fun doing that. So.
Well, can you tell me how you came about writing your own software? And is this something that you're just using exclusively for yourself, or have you sold this software? Or
I've sold it. I made it. Well, when I first started dabbling around with it, when I did this Apollo astronaut dollar design, coin design back around 1998, and I basically hacked together some sort of rudimentary, simple programs that I would run one program and do some things on the surface, and then I'd stop, and then I'd run a different program and do some more things on it. And I kind of put it together into a little bit more of a cohesive thing, and then I started to think, well, this might be commercially viable or of interest. So around 2000, I think it was, I basically scrapped it and started all over from scratch, writing it with the intent that it would be a commercially distributed software. And so it is available now. Yes, I do sell it. I don't sell a lot of it. I don't try to spend a lot of time marketing it. Most of the time I'm busy with the minting business and not so much with the trying to sell the software.
Okay.
But I do have it if somebody was interested by it.
But it's also something that I'm sure helps you in your, regardless of whether or not you're actually marketing it, like you said.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, using the software. I mean, that's the key. That's the key thing in my business, and in my being able to do sculpt the coin designs that I do. The software and really knowing it really well and having it written,
right, basically custom. Right, it's basically custom tailored for you and your needs. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
so it was a lot of effort. I mean, the rewrite took like 2 years of not full time, but I'd work pretty intensively for a few weeks and then off and go get back to it again. But and I was kind of using it a little bit now and then on the way once I kind of got to a point where I could actually dabble with it again. There's other software packages out there that have similar capabilities, and there's some that have much fewer capabilities that are relatively inexpensive. Other software that's got similar capabilities is quite a bit more expensive than mine. But but I don't have anything budgeted for marketing. I have my website, and that's pretty much all I do with it as far as promoting it. But I have more fun, making, using it and making coins than I do trying to sell it.
Absolutely. I guess what year did you start the company, and did it start more from the sculpting end or the minting end, or through the actual program itself?
Right. Well, what happened was, what really sort of brought this all on was, I mentioned that when I did that Apollo astronaut design,
right.
I'd been doing a lot of image processing software at the time, writing a lot of image processing software, and I thought, yeah, I could sit down and draw this Apollo astronaut design, but if I want to make it look really neat, really realistic, and I want to make pictures of it with different surface finishes and all that without having to redraw the whole thing and everything, I thought, well, I ought to do this in software. So then I dabbled around and scrapped together a few, rudimentary sculpting tools, and I made this Apollo astronaut design. And I made some really nice renderings of it, and that's what I had sent off to Congress and the Mint and whatnot, and that was favorably received, but that was just before they decided they wanted to have a woman on the coin. But anyway, I still had an interest in actually making, even if the Mint wasn't going to make this coin, I wanted to make it. At least I wasn't going to do counterfeiting or anything, and I wasn't going to have it say $1, but I was going to make it look kind of like, you hold it in your hand and say, well, this is what the dollar coin could have looked like if they had used this other design. So I went around, I output a big bunch of data from my sculpture into a file, a simple file that some CAD/CAM type systems can accept. And so I went around to some machine shops in my area, in Denver area. Probably went to like 5 or 6 different machine shops, and a couple of them said right off, no, we can't do that. And there were like 3 others that said, well, let's give us a try. So I gave them the file, and in all 3 cases, their CAD/CAM systems choked on it because it was too much data. You're talking data points that are, a thousandth of an inch apart in an area that's, I think it's about a 1 square inch or so.
No, right, I got you.
So you're talking about a million data points, which, a million bytes or whatever isn't much data. I mean, if it was a digital image, it wouldn't be that big a thing. But as a 3-dimensional sculpted surface that the these CAD programs have to manipulate the whole thing all at once, or rotating it around and all this, they all choked on it, and so I couldn't get it output in any kind of format that was suitable. I mean, I wanted to output. I had this big challenge. I had this nice digital thing, but how do I get it from the virtual, unreal digital world to something physical I can hold in my hand? Anything that transition from going from the virtual to reality, was tricky, and so that was the point. I'd say, well, if I'm going to ever have any chance of having this thing made into a real thing, I'm going to have to do some more on my own software to make it work. And so I started investigating some of these different computerized engraving machines and milling machines to see what kind of capabilities they had and what might work. And I identified one manufacturer that made some that I thought would be really good. Basically placed an order, but he's a popular guy, and everybody wants him to do stuff for him. I basically had to wait like a year and a half to get it. But got this computerized engraving machine and started cutting my own models, and didn't have any problems with my software choking on my data because I wrote it especially to be able to do that. So that's kind of how that came to be. And so so the Designs Computed company, I basically started that around 1999 actually, and the reason I chose that name is because of DC, Designs Computed. That's also my initials, Daniel Carr. But strangely enough, I actually started. The first thing I ever did with the company was to do a publishing thing of an automotive poster.